Imagine spending 6 months planning the perfect military operation. You train day and night. You build custom weapons. You risk your entire fleet crossing the Pacific Ocean. And in 90 minutes, you achieve total tactical surprise. But here is the paradox. You didn't just fail to win the war. You guaranteed you would eventually lose it. This isn't just the story of the attack on Pearl Harbor. This is the story of how Japan won the battle but set the trap for their own destruction. Welcome back to the deep dive. To understand why Japan came to Hawaii, you have to look at a resource they didn't have: oil. By 1941, the Japanese Empire had been expanding across Asia for a decade. But the United States, Great Britain, and the Netherlands controlled 80% of the world's oil supplies in the Pacific. When Japan occupied French Indochina, President Roosevelt froze Japanese assets and cut off oil exports. For Japan, this was an existential crisis. Their navy estimated they had less than 2 years of fuel reserves. They had two choices: withdraw from their conquests or seize the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies. But there was a massive problem. The United States Pacific Fleet was anchored at Pearl Harbor. If Japan moved south to take the oil, the U.S. Navy could cut their supply lines and crush them from the east. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto proposed a radical solution: a preemptive strike to destroy the American fleet in one blow. Strategically, Pearl Harbor was a nightmare target. The water depth was only 40 feet. Standard aerial torpedoes dropped from aircraft would dive 100 feet and stick in the mud. So, Japanese engineers did the impossible. They modified Type 91 torpedoes with wooden stabilizers, allowing them to run at just 35 feet. They practiced relentlessly in Kagoshima Bay, which geographically resembled Pearl Harbor. On paper, the plan was brilliant, but there was a fatal flaw in the target selection. As the first wave of 183 aircraft struck Battleship Row, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida scanned the harbor. He saw the Oklahoma capsizing. He saw the Arizona erupt. But he radioed back to the carrier Akagi with grave news. The battleships are destroyed. But the carriers are not here. The Lexington and Enterprise were at sea delivering aircraft to Wake and Midway. The Saratoga was in San Diego. Japan's entire strategy was based on the decisive battle, destroying America's ability to fight. But they prioritized obsolete battleships over the future of naval warfare: aircraft carriers. While the high command focused on capital ships, individual Americans displayed incredible resolve. On Ford Island, Chief Ordnanceman John Finn dragged a .50 caliber machine gun into the open. He had no tripod. He mounted it on a training stand and fired directly at Japanese planes strafing the runway. Shrapnel tore into his arms, his chest, his stomach. He kept firing. He would later receive the Medal of Honor. Meanwhile, on the USS Nevada, the only battleship to get underway, Ensign Joe Tausig was on the bridge when a bomb detonated nearby. Shrapnel nearly severed his leg. He refused to be moved. He sat propped against a bulkhead, directing the ship's navigation until she was deliberately beached at Hospital Point to avoid sinking and blocking the channel. These weren't just isolated acts of heroism. They signaled something the Japanese did not anticipate: resistance. Here is the most critical strategic error of the entire operation. The Japanese hit every battleship, but they left 3 targets completely untouched. 1. The 4.5 million barrels of oil stored in massive tanks just north of the harbor. That oil was the lifeblood of the Pacific Fleet. If destroyed, the U.S. Navy would have had to withdraw to California. 2. The naval shipyard repair facilities. Within months, workers raised, patched, and returned most of the damaged battleships to service. 3. The submarine base. American submarines, undamaged, sailed out of Pearl Harbor that same week and began strangling Japanese merchant shipping. Admiral Yamamoto, who studied at Harvard and served in Washington, understood the United States better than his subordinates. When he learned the carriers and infrastructure survived, he reportedly said, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with terrible resolve." Whether he actually said that is debated. What isn't debated is the accuracy of the sentiment. December 7, 1941 ended with 2,403 Americans dead. The Arizona remains a tomb for over 900 sailors who are still entombed inside. But Japan did not destroy the Pacific Fleet. They galvanized it. The day after the attack, isolationism in the United States evaporated. Recruitment stations saw lines around the block. The industrial capacity of the United States, untouched by enemy bombs, converted to wartime production. Japan's window of opportunity was exactly 6 months. They rampaged across the Pacific, but they never delivered the knockout blow. In June 1942, the carriers that escaped Pearl Harbor ambushed the Japanese fleet at Midway Atoll. In 5 minutes, American dive bombers destroyed 3 Japanese carriers. The 4th went down later that day. Japan lost the offensive capability they had spent a decade building, and it all traces back to the morning they left the oil tanks standing and the carriers at sea. Pearl Harbor is often taught as a day of infamy, and it was. But from a strategic lens, it is also a masterclass in what happens when you win the battle but ignore the objective. The Japanese aimed to destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet. They sank ships. They killed sailors. But the fleet survived because the fleet isn't steel. It's the people, the infrastructure, and the will to continue. If you want to understand how the United States went from the ashes of Pearl Harbor to Tokyo Bay in less than 4 years, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started with the Pacific War. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.